nhớ rằng rằng phụ mà chúa lên sao tụ là nó cũng hoa này cả trong xe trả tàu tân chỉ là sợ hoa sợ cho nó nếu là vậy nếu ở chán tân đi thì chỉ hút cho mình chỉ tiền á em mua hết tên là làm ba cho lo nào cảตัวthì chỉ tàu cáiตัวnữa mà nếu nào cũng trả lại những tuần bao rồi ra đã nên kia được quỹ lên ra đã nên nói mà sau cháu vì đó từ viên dạo Aashly Maiv Paj Santiago nhưng nếu chỉ tàu lòng tuần ý cho bé này kì tuần ý thế bé nhớ là họ cũngจะvideo họ cả giờ nên lúc chỉ tao subscribe được của trong nó là họ thắp bắt một nhảy subscribe là chẳng cả của nó mà cũng cả tệ ổn định sẽ được là còn cái lời rẻ nó của ít liền.
I wanna be a weekend lover. Yeah, I'ma be the best damn lover you got. I wanna mess up your covers. You love. I don't wanna meet your mother. Never ever ask me how I've been. Remember why you have my number. You love. I'm the best thing that has ever happened to you. Here's your time to shine. Now show me what you can do. The way my hands feel on your body, the way we're dancing in the dark. With every move I make, you're falling. The way my lips feel.
The evening sky was beginning to darken as my boss sat with Landon outside in the tents. The wind was warm, and he looked handsome as he sat across from her. He had asked her to let her hair down with a yellow dress he'd picked out. To her horror, when she opened her suitcase, it was full of foreign clothes, and she had no idea how to put it on. He looked comfortable as he nursed in ice-cold water. A pretty waitress arrived wearing a white lacy top and a blue blouse skirt. She had her hair in a bun with a bright pink flower on the side. She put her hands together and bowed to them. "Tam sabaidi bo?" she asked with a sweet smile. Landon turned and looked at Maiv Paj, and she realized he didn't speak a word of Lao. Smiling, Maiv Paj put her hands together to return the greeting and replied, "Koi sabaidi kapchai." They exchanged a few words before she left. Maiv Paj turned to look at her husband, who had his hands underneath his chin looking at her. "Marachina?" she asked. He smiled. "Cái hai tôi lùm bò mình cơ. Cô tôi lo tới khen họ chế của những hai mình mà. Rồi ý lấy cái hai lùm mình cả mình thế à? Nếu là nông hai tía ư nó đã chỉ. Cái bà hậu lùi giá đấy." He crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair. "Mà nó cũng chế cái sai. She cái sai nó đã chỉ cái là ô lò sưng." She chuckled. "Ê ya, cô sai nó xoay à nè? Cái là ô xoay à lò sưng mà." She smiled and opened up the menu. She looked at it, and then she realized that they were the only two around. She set the menu down and leaned forward. She asked. Landon looked up at her, and then he took a drink of water. And then it dawned on her. "Wow, sweetie, mà nói giờ ướp trong trong, cô chỉ sa cả luôn từ là chỗ ư, mà nói giờ có thể cố sự. Sao nhớ xia? She cái sẵn non chỉ kể cả là ô lò." Maiv Paj ordered a little bit of everything, and when they brought the food out, she took the moment to try it all. Some were so good, while others had her making a face. Landon laughed at her, and then at one point, he offered her a carrot. She didn't know what to do, and he curled a finger at her. She moved forward and opened her mouth to take it. When she closed her mouth around the carrot, her lips touched his fingers lightly. And when he withdrew, he brought his fingers to his lips. She didn't know what to do as he smiled. His phone rang, and he reached for it as she recollected herself. "Hello? That's fine. Get the documents to Jacob to sign tomorrow. Don't let him change his mind." "Good job." He hung up and looked at her. "Kaponachila, sweetie." "Kapay sweetie, eh? Lalo na yatali kana." He leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Sweetie, ya lalo kajisa. Kachinyalo." "Chia, tiya kuch pa de nitsali kya. Kapaka kamako my pasana." He shook his head. "Chika, shada tumako my patato ne. Kusaka kuhu ilum bay wa shada huchito. The tele cheng na kuna. E kudu hu ka Landon sane. Kapasari kama. Chisa. Vì thế giờ có hu lại kề của nhà cha. Lo, như có nằm ở ta là này kề là umu. This frightened her, and she withdrew from him. He must have known because he laughed and stood up, offering her his hand. "Sunshine, ma, sweetie.
Would you stay till the morning light? Or would you follow me? Or would you let it be? If I tonight. We could do this right. We'll find the remedy. Or would you stay with me now till the morning light? Before you turn away, I just want you to know that I didn't.
Landon turned the light off in the bathroom and found her standing by the window looking out as the night sky began to blanket around the world. He had changed into a white t-shirt and black PJ pants. She was wearing a white shirt and a pair of red cotton pants. Her hair was down her back, and he knew how soft those strands were. He lifted the blankets and she turned around to him. She asked. He patted the spot beside him. She didn't move. She let out a deep breath. Sweetie, got sunshine there, She laughed. Oh, wow. It took a moment, but she eventually made her way to the bed and got under the blankets. When he moved to kiss her goodnight, she put up her hands. She cried. Laughing, he replied, "Gu kiss ka goodnight sana. Còn nói ya ba có bự rong sữa. Thảo to tay sư bà tao. Cho lý chỉ tao nia của đô na." She let out a deep breath. "Tu chi ya của nia ka na. Ka tu sang ya sana." Landon smiled as she looked away. He took the moment and stole another kiss. She froze and he shrugged. "Hai cha có của tu sa ma. Bự rong ka na." The blood that stained the river, a crimson shade, flowed down around Landon's feet, and he looked up to see the pile of bodies lying in the river, flies buzzing. Red and green sashes were floating down the river, and as he walked up, the bodies began to move, and they started to look at him with open mouths. Maggots were crawling out, and he screamed, shouting, and then he turned to find his father's bloody gurgle of his last breath. "Landon!" He jerked awake and found that my pa was holding him, and fear was written across her face. He had broken into a sweat, and he shoved the blankets off of him. Shit. Why now? Why tonight? He'd hoped that he would be okay until he returned to the States. He took several deep breaths, and then he felt her small hands around his arms. "Landon? Kapolika?" she asked softly. He rubbed his face and gently pushed her away. He stood and walked to the bathroom, turned the water on, and washed his face. When he turned around, she was standing by the doorway staring at him. She asked. He crossed to her and took her into his arms. Sweetie. He couldn't tell her. She pushed herself away and then looked up at him. Nothing, he replied. He watched as she struggled with herself, but she ended up standing on her toes and gave him a quick kiss on the lips. He smiled and led her hand back to bed. He opened his arms and, surprisingly, she came to him. And when he wrapped his arms around her body and she curved around him, he felt his heart rate returning to normal again. Her soft breathing clouded the dark thoughts in his mind, and he slowly felt himself let go of the nightmares.
I think I have too much process, and I've been feeling kinda hopeless. I know I'm not supposed to feel this way. I know it's been a while since I held you in my arms. And
The next morning when Landon woke, her head was on his chest, still lost in a deep sleep. He smiled and bent down to kiss her lips gently as he removed himself from her and left to wash up. In the shower, where the water rushed down his body, he felt a different kind of energy. He dressed, and when he came out, she was watching this morning sun rise from the horizon. He walked to put his hand around her waist, and she turned to look at him. He ran his fingers through her hair and smiled. She shrugged. Gucci bao Landon. She shook her head. Oli, dia của cho có một sự cật sâu nữa. Ta kỹ ư đã có một tuần này ta chính cả. Còn đang đợi tia kề. Có những đó cũng một chuyện. He watched as the shine in her eyes disappeared, and she looked away. He caught her chin with his fingers and tilted her up to look at him. "Ya Olivia, got your son Mujela?" he asked. She moved out of his hold, but he wrapped his arms around her and held her in place. "Sweetie, gu bao tia ka the gu za ge shi shou lo sing ge ji zhong su lo. Da shi gu jia lu tia zhe zhong li jia la, gu yo chi bu da chi lo zhao ge." She turned to look at him. "Kun chai cha ge hai dao e, ge wo chi dao se." Smiling, he replied, "Nếu tự của chị tao thì của cho cha đó có chị của có tao của là tao. Mù, cái chuyện muốn做咩của cha có muốn nào mà, mù gì. Ô lê mà." Then he smiled as he thought of yesterday. "Có bao giờ kể ba nào con giờ?" She laughed. "Sao vậy chị xiao?"
Won't you sing out your frustration? Just say a word. Keep on staring at the pavement. God knows who hurt. Ooh, your mind is a ghost town, echoing inside your walls. 5 feet under.
Nia, my boss said as she rushed inside the house to hug her mother. It had been just 2 days since she'd left the house as a married woman, and her heart had broken seeing her mom. Her mother backed up and examined her dressed in modern clothes, her hair sleek and shiny with brand new shoes. "Wow, Miss Hai, her mother said. My pa hugged her again, and Landon handed her the suitcase. She took her mother's hand and placed it on top of it. "Nia, lupi sano yata gutsine. Mo kun jao tia ja kau chia nya ro no ring oling." She turned to look at Landon and then said, "Ne tu vao yetu yo." Landon came beside her and put his arm around her waist. "Ya yo Nia. Gachimo de gutsine na." Her parents tearfully accepted the gift as his grandparents came to hug her. It was toward evening when my pa made her way to Paku's house and found her friend sitting in the front of her house sewing pandao. She carried a bag and knocked on the fence. Paku looked up, and a smile broke across her face as she put her pandao down and came running to unlock the fence. She threw her arms around my pa and cried. The two held each other for a long time before my pa let go and handed the bag to Paku. "Na, moruko," she said. Paku took it and then opened it. She looked up. "Ocho, my pa, có chỉ kia có trường xã mốc của thế nào? Có thể của tụi viên giáo trong sắp lời. Của tôi nào, giờ của tôi hay được có hai tia, tay kia xí kề, đón đỡ tới tia lần. Chị quay một tỷ u. Của chỉ bảo hai tia sao thổ tư, mà lấy trả cái là sinh trí đồ. Có nhớ này kề, của tí trong sáng chiều các tụ khăn nữa mà. Sao tao kề ba lấy trả nó là, xong đó tôi là cô." Paku wiped her eyes and tried to stifle a sob. "My pa, giờ có một lời lớn thì ô của luôn một té à. Chị của dân cho có chán tung đi liền của tụi mình bên giờ rong à. Có tàu trong hông rong ấy. Có một tàu tụi chị, ô giờ ba tàu cái này cái gì anh chị. Cái này cái gì chị sợ nhẹ là. Ê của dân chị, chị muốn nụ liền." My pa wiped her eyes and hugged her friend. "Sao tôi xé mà? Của my pa có, mà là chị, cái chị hai đó cô."
Would you stay till the morning light? Or would you follow me? Or would you let it be? If I leave tonight, we could do this right. We'll find the remedy. Or would you stay with me now till the morning light? Before you turn away, I just want you to know that I didn't throw your stuff away. Before you make up your mind that I'm nowhere to find, I'm standing right here.
The moment of truth arrived, sooner than my pa anticipated. When the news came that she'd passed and was bound for America, she spent the night crying in her mother's arms. Her father had tried to maintain his emotions, but the day that she was getting ready to leave, he broke down and hugged her. She didn't want to let go. She didn't want to leave. This was her home, her roots, her beginning. She held her parents for so long that eventually Landon had to come and pry her free. "Inside, sao có cô mà? Cái chi mù có lúc nên xong đó là nông nửa nè đến được chỉ mong nó mà," her mother said. My pa felt her heart sinking and her legs went numb. When she felt she was going to collapse, Landon picked her up in his arms, and carried her out into the van that was waiting for her. His grandparents had gone ahead, and it was just the two of them together. As the driver began driving, she sobbed, and he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close to him. Satoshia, he whispered. He wiped her tears away and tilted her chin up where he met her lips gently as the van drove out of the town she'd called home for the past 25 years. She tried to get her tears under control, but the thought consumed her, and she kept thinking of her mother's broken face as she hugged her for the last time. She could feel her father's hand on her head still, and she broke free from the kiss Landon gave her and threw her arms around him. He comforted her, and she cried her heart out. A few days from now, she would be in a new home, a new place, and begin her life as a wife in a place called America. Ở trong này sẽ đợi chừng là cộng kia là rễ nó cụ thia. Tuần chi, chừng là tờ tận tây nó. Đó tí lắm lòng hạt tìa xe, mái ba mua luôn đang nhớ rồi mì cà tê. Từ luôn đang hàm mùi rong đi cả nó mà. Ở trong, bé mà lấy xin chi đó.
I wanna be a weekend lover. Yeah, I'ma be the best damn lover you got. I wanna mess up your covers.